Okay, welcome everyone here tonight to our next installment of the study of the second book of Samuel and David and his reign. Tonight we're going to be looking at the the revolt or the conspiracy, the beginning of the revolt of Absalom against David. And so let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. All right. The lesson tonight is going to be chapters 15 and 16. And where we are in our timeline down here, if you look that we're down here, it's getting down toward the end, actually. In the date would be 976 BCE. You see Absalom's rebellion and David's exile. David at this point is about 65 years old. So he's still a young man. All right, just so you know, 65, he's still a young fella. During this time when we left last week, was Absalom had just returned, and that was about 4 years previous. And during this 4 years, David was actually working on construction of his own palace and the construction of a tabernacle. It's David's tabernacle, basically. And so we're increasing our viewership just a little bit. I see my sister from Georgia is on with us tonight, so I'm happy for that. And so anyway, let's go ahead to this. We left off last week with Absalom being not so much welcomed back into the palace, but maybe more like he was tolerated back in the palace. And so it ended with David giving him a kiss. Okay, so evidently that was something that you did. It was probably one of those things you go mwah mwah on the two sides, and supposedly that was supposed to put Absalom back in the good graces of David and vice versa. But as we can see, that was just a breeding ground, a petri dish for Absalom to start working on his conspiracy of taking over for dear old dad. Because he thought he could do a better job of it, and he just wasn't really happy with the way things went. So he started his campaign right then, and you wonder, okay, how in the world could David be so? Well, let's see, what would you say? Oblivious to the dangers that are around him, and I think it's possibly because he was tied up with building his own palace, and then also the idea of building a new tabernacle for the Ark of the Covenant, because he wanted something to cover up the Ark and so that it's not exposed. And so he actually did build a smaller version of the tabernacle that they had in the wilderness that they'd built, at Mount Sinai and carried around them for 400 years. And so he had built one that would house the Ark of the Covenant, and so that may have taken up a lot of his time. I'm not sure. So anyway, let's look at the verses here in 2 Samuel 15, 1 through 6. Now it came about after this that Absalom provided himself with a chariot, horses, and 50 men as runners before him. Absalom used to rise up early and stand beside the road to the city gate. Whenever anyone had a suit to come to the king for justice, then Absalom would call to him and say, "What town are you from?" And they would answer, and "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Absalom would say to him, "See, your claims are good and right, but there is no one assigned to you by the king to hear you." Moreover, Absalom would say, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, then every man who has any suit or case would come to me, and I would give him justice." So, also, whenever anyone approached to bow, and to bow down to him, he would stretch out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. So that Absalom kept doing this to everyone in Israel who came to the king for judgment. Thus, Absalom stole the hearts of the people of Israel. Now, here's the beginning of the conspiracy. You can see Absalom working in this. He he showed kind of his intentions a good bit, because he got a chariot. Okay, the kings of Israel were not supposed to have chariots. Okay, and they weren't supposed to have many horses and all of those kind of trappings of the monarchy. And then this idea of having 50 guys as runners that would go before his chariot, just an auspicious display of royalty that, uh, you know, in certain times people will look at that and say, "Oh wow, yay, that's our king," and then other times, when times get bad, they would look at it and say, "Oh, look at that guy, that pompous rascal. He's doing all these airs, and we are." We are hurting here. So, that's a two-edged sword for that kind of behavior. Said, and Absalom would get up early in the morning. He would stand at the gate. All right, and I neglected to show you. Go back through our little timeline here. I was anxious to get into things, but you can see here that we're at Absalom's revolt, and then we'll talk about his counselors and all that kind of stuff. But that's where we're at in there, and this is where the place things are taking place. You know me, got to have my maps, and uh, so a lot of this is taking place right here in Jerusalem, and then across the Kidron Valley, right in here up to the Mount of Olives. So a lot of that activity in chapter 16 is going to be there, and then down here in Hebron, there's going to be a little bit of action taking place down there. So that's where we're looking at tonight. Okay, and so Absalom, he's preparing himself to be the king. He's got his chariot, he's got his horses, he's got the runners and so forth. He's standing at the gate. Um, and every day, if any of you have ever been to these ancient Middle Eastern cities, and at the ruins, they would have the gate, and they would have seats, or just places in the stones out there outside the gate, and you could tell the seat or the throne for the king, or the head kahuna there, that they would it'd have a little bit higher seat, and then it would have an awning over it so that to shelter them from the elements, and then you would have some other seats along the way for the various people that handled certain things with within the city. And so they would actually, people would come by, and this is kind of where they would conduct business for the city, and or for the state, whatever that that particular town controlled. People could come there, and then they could address the king or some of his magistrates and so forth. Um, we saw something similar to that up at the city of Dan, up in northern Israel, and then there's some places at Megiddo and so forth. So it's that was the common practice. So Absalom would get out there in the mornings, and he would to talk to these people and said, "Boy, it sure is a shame that you can't get any justice here, because nobody can get in to see the king. He's just not seeing anybody Well, that's not really true, because the king, obviously, he heard the woman from Tekoa when Nathan brought the lady from Tekoa in to see him, and he saw other people, but uh, Absalom had he had an agenda here, and that's what that's what he's doing, is trying to ingratiate himself to the people and just saying, look, if I was the judge here, I would see everybody and make sure that you got justice. I would make sure that you got what you needed. And that was his implication, was that if he was, he was a really good politician here, is what he's doing. If you will vote for me, you'll get everything that you want, that sort of thing. And so that's what he's doing here. And he kept doing this over, and people would come up and they would bow down, because they know he's the king's son and he's the heir apparent. So they're bowing down. He'd rush to them, pick them up. Oh, no, no, you need to stand up. And he would give them the mwah, mwah kiss thing on it. And so that would kind of flatter the person. That would make them feel like, ooh, maybe I'm so, this is nice that the king's son would treat me thus. And so he was watching, he was there with these people, and the Bible says that Absalom stole the hearts of the people of Israel. So here he was. He became very, very popular. He was also, remember, we talked about him being very handsome and a manly man, and he had lots of wavy hair, that sort of thing. And I'm not doing it right, okay. And so, the kind of, don't hate me because I'm so beautiful, that sort of thing. And that's what the Bible said. He had lots of hair, and that every year he would get it all shaved off, and it'd be about 3 to 5 pounds of hair there. So everybody thought that Absalom was just really something special. So let's go ahead with, and those of you that are not used to getting on with us, you can unmute yourself down there anytime you want to and say whatever it is that you want to. And I'm going to try to keep my my buttons here from moving everything all around. But you can get on there and at any time and participate. Please do participate if you have a question, and we can discuss it. I had a class this morning that I taught for my yeshiva. That's kind of a worldwide thing, and it's one that, it sure is a lot nicer when people will stop you and ask you questions, and then you can kind of go back and forth. But then when you have to go for 2 hours with just nonstop, it really gets tiring. So ask a question once in a while. It's not going to hurt my feelings at all. All right, so let's go ahead with verse 7. At the end of 40 years, Absalom said to the king, okay, that's not 40, it should be 4. It's just an error in translation, because we know that David's whole reign was only 40 years. So at the end of 4 years, let's say, Absalom said to the king, please let me go to Hebron and pay my vow, which I had vowed to Adonai. For your servant vowed a vow while I was still living in Geshur in Aram, saying, if Adonai will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve Adonai. So the king said to him, go in shalom. Then he rose and went to Hebron. And but Absalom sent spies to all the tribes of Israel to say, as soon as you hear the sound of the shofar, then you are to say, Absalom has become king in Hebron. Now 200 men from Jerusalem went with Absalom, who were invited and were going innocently, knowing nothing of the situation. Also, Absalom has sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from the town of Gilo, while he was offering sacrifices. So the conspiracy gained momentum for the people following Absalom. continued to increase. So there, Absalom he's getting it all put together here. He's got everybody going, and um, one of the problems with having a garden is having peppers, and I think I must have gotten some pepper stuff in my eye when I was eating supper tonight, because I have some pepper um powder that we made up from our garden, and it is very potent. And so I may be wearing an eye patch next week because my eye is gone. Okay. Uh, all right. So at the end of this 40 years, 4 years, I mean, Absalom makes up this idea of, let me go down to Hebron. All right. And so David, again, clueless David, he says, sure, go ahead. And Absalom went down there, and he brought along, or he sent out spies to everybody, or, kind of surreptitiously, and said, okay, when you start hearing those trumpets sounding that all around, that means that Absalom has become the king in Hebron. And so then he invited 200 men from Jerusalem, and these were probably the leading lights, the maybe some priests, maybe some politicians, and so forth, that they had no clue what was going on either. They knew that, hey, the king's son has said, hey, let's go down to Hebron, and it might be a party. So they were looking into that. And they said, yeah, let's do it. Let's go. And but then once they figured out what was going on, then there was not a whole lot they could do about it if they wanted to keep their head. Absalom also sent for Ahithophel, who was, depending on whether you go along with that theory or not, was the grandfather of Bathsheba. And so, but he was, whatever he was a counselor to David. And so this was a big catch, uh, to have a Ahithophel to kind of, go over to the side of Absalom. So it just that process of gaining this revolution just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So in verse 13, then a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are following Absalom. Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, arise, let us flee, or else none of us will escape from Absalom. Leave in haste, or else he will overtake us quickly and bring disaster down on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. Then the king's officials said to the king, behold, your servants are ready to do whatever our lord the king chooses. So the king set out, and his entire household followed him. But the king left behind 10 concubines to take care of the place. As the king went out and all the people after him, they paused at the last house. All his servants passed on beside him, all the Kerethites, the Pelethites, and all the Gittites, and the Menontites, the 600 men that had come after him from Gath. Okay, these are the people that have been with David forever. They'd been with him when he was over there in the Philistine territory, when he was living over in that part of the world, in the Gaza Strip is where it is today. So they all passed by him. All right. So here we've got David looks at this and he says, "Oh man, we got to go." So evidently he had his own people out there. He knew that this had built momentum, and that there were people that were going to follow Absalom, and he did not want to fight him at that point. He didn't want to put Jerusalem under siege, because that would have been a disaster, and to be able to to have to ward off his own son, and a siege of Jerusalem, people, that was a no-win situation there. But he said, no, there's no time for lollygagging around. We got to get out of here now. And so everybody said, okay, let's go. And so they just took off very, very quickly. And nobody, said, no, we can fight them, or let's stick around. No, everybody said, all right, let's go. And so they took off, and they were heading out across the Kidron Valley, up over the Mount of Olives. And um, so a whole bunch of people that, like I said, it had the 600 men that he had with him forever, these guys. And so they all followed him. They were right with him there. In verse 19, then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, why should you also go with us? Go back and stay with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your own place. Your arrival was only yesterday. Should I make you wander around with us today to go wherever I may go? Go back and take your kinsman back with you. Kindness and truth be with you. But Ittai answered the king and said, as Adonai lives and my lord the king lives, surely it is whatever place my lord the king will be, whether for death or for life, there also will your servant be. So David said to Ittai, go on, cross over then. Come on. So Ittai the Gittite passed on with all his men and all the little children who were with him, while all the country was weeping with a loud voice, and all the people were crossing over as the king was crossing over Kidron Valley. So all the people crossed over toward the road of the wilderness. Okay, now here is another example that I've taught on lots of times, or mentioned lots of times, that the Bible does speak in um, um, it speaks in I can't even think of the word now, where here's the example. It says all the country was weeping. Well, does that mean all the country? No, we know it wasn't, because there were people from Benjamin who were glad to see David go. All the people from the city crossed over into the wilderness, and the wilderness road. Now that's what we talk about. Uh, yeah, your teenager says everybody's doing it, or we threw a party and everybody came. It's that's just how the Bible speaks a lot of times. Okay, and hyperbole. That's the word I was trying to think of. Okay, so so that's what's happening. And he has this guy Ittai the Gittite, who is a mercenary, by the way. Okay, these guys. He said, you just showed up here yesterday, and basically they were bodyguards for the king, and they would do whatever, but they were mercenaries. And so he's telling him, hey, why don't you just go on, get out of this? This is not your fight, and don't worry about it. And Ittai said, nope, wherever you go, I'm going to go, and I'm your man. Okay. And so he said, okay, go on. Well, this guy, he had wives and children, and all of his men had wives and children. And so they all took off and went with David. And so verse 24, then behold, Zadok also came, and all the Levites with him, carrying the ark of the covenant of God. They set down the ark of God. Then Abiathar came up, and until all the people had passed by out of the city. But the king said to Zadok, return the ark to the ark of God to the city. If I find favor in Adonai's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it and his dwelling. But if he says thus, I have no delight in you, here I am. Uh, let him do to me as it seems good in his eyes. The king also said to Zadok the priest, do you not see? Return to the city in Shalom with your two sons that are with you, Ahimaaz, your son, and Jonathan, son of Abiathar. See, I will wait at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. Therefore, Zadok and Abiathar uh, carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. All right. So Zadok, who was he and Abiathar, they kind of shared the head duties of of the high priesthood. There was not just one single one, because both of them had come from different directions, and Zadok was actually probably more in line for it, but Abiathar had been there, and so David worked out a way that both of them could administer the things of God, and there was not a lot of conflict between the two of them. And so they had come out with the ark, thinking that, okay, we'll bring the ark with David because that's kind of he is the king, and we're going to bring that out there. But David said, no, we're not going to do that. The ark is not going to be for me um, one of these good luck tokens. Okay, it's we're not going to treat the ark like it was a rabbit's foot, that whoever has the ark wins the day. No, we're going to put the ark back into place in the little tabernacle that they had built for it. And David just says, and if God is with me, if Adonai is with me, then yep, we're going to be right there, um, back and to see it. And if not, then let the Lord do what he will with me. And so David had resigned himself to whatever happened. He was going to be with the Lord. The Lord was going to be with him, and whatever it was, if the Lord was for him, okay. If the Lord was against him, okay. It didn't matter to David. The ark was going to stay where it belonged, in Jerusalem, and not with him as some kind of a good luck charm. And then the other side of it is that if he has his two men, Zadok and Abiathar, there, in working in the tabernacle, and close to uh, Absalom, I guess, if he would be that close to them, and then their sons, um, that they could be David's eyes and ears here. And so he was David. Remember, was a good military man. He understood the benefit of having a spy in the camp, and so that's kind of what he was having doing for or with Zadok and Abiathar. All right. And so they carried the ark back, put it where it belonged, and it remained there. Okay. Any comments or questions? All right. Um, Carrying on to verse 30. Then David continued to go up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he ascended. He had his head covered, and he was walking barefoot. So all the people with him each covered his head as they went up, weeping as they ascended. Then someone told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David prayed, Adonai, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. So David is leaving. He's trying to be brave, but when it gets right down to it, he's going along there. He's got his head covered because it's a real shame. Plus, he doesn't know what enemies are there. So if he's got his head covered, maybe they wouldn't know that it was exactly the king. He's walking barefooted as kind of a sign of mourning. And so all of his people did the same thing. There were several psalms that were written during this period of time when David was escaping from Jerusalem. And then, it just seemed like the last straw here was that Ahithophel his trusted counselor had defected over to Absalom. And so all David could pray, he wasn't going to pray against his old counselor. He was just he's going to say, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. And so that's a lesson for us today. Sometimes when somebody comes up against us, and it's just rather than like a couple of the disciples wanted to do was rain down fire on their heads, uh, David said, no, just let his counsel to Absalom come to nothing. May it be bad counsel. And so then that way things would work out. They would take care of themselves in that regard. All right. So going on to verse 32, then David went on until he reached the summit of Mount Olives, we're talking about, where God was worshipped. And behold, Hushai the Archite met him with his coat rent and dust on his head. David said to him, if you pass on with me, then you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king. I was your father's servant from then, but now I will be your servant. Then you can thwart Ahithophel's counsel for me. Won't you have with you Zadok and Abiathar, the Kohanim there? So whatever you hear from the royal palace, you should report it to Zadok and Abiathar, the Kohanim. See, they have their two sons with them there, Zadok's son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. By them you can send to me everything that you hear. So David's friend Hushai reached the city just as Absalom was entering Jerusalem. So from that you can tell how quickly Absalom had come back to Jerusalem, and how how close a call it was for David to actually escape from Absalom. I mean, it was that close that if you can, it's not very far from the walls of the city of David, of Jerusalem at that time, down the Kidron Valley and across back up onto the Mount of Olives. I mean, you can walk that in just a very few, an hour or so of walking. I don't know how long it would take you to walk, but back in those days, there probably wasn't a lot of buildings and stuff, and it wouldn't be that hard to do. And so it was a very, very close call. So he runs into this friend, and he's got his coat torn because he's in distress. He's mourning the fact that David is being defeated here, and he's got dust on his head, and another sign of his distress and mourning. And David said, now, if you pass on with me, you will be a burden to me. Okay, what does that mean? Well, we don't really know. Was Hushai, was he somehow impaired, maybe, that being on the run with David would not have been a good thing? We don't know. But we do know that he was a trusted enough friend of David, that he could tell him all of his spy network there in Jerusalem. And so can you imagine if Hushai had actually gone against David or defected over to Absalom? That would have destroyed everything for David, because the two priests and their sons would have been imprisoned or killed because of being exposed as being spies. So but they concocted this deal. Says, you go back to Absalom and you tell him, look, I was a servant for David, I was a servant for the king, but I will be your servant now. And again, he must have been somebody that was pretty special and maybe had special abilities or whatever for him to do that, and for Absalom to accept him and bring him in. And one of the things that he was to do was somehow to be a counterpoint to Ahithophel and all of the uh, counsel that he might give to Absalom. And then he goes ahead then and exposes his spy network there, that says, now you have Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, and so whatever you hear from the royal palace, you report it to Zadok and Abiathar, and they'll tell their sons, and their sons then will run up to us and let us know. I'll be waiting at the fords of the Jordan River, and just to know whether I should cross over and go over into on the other side of the Jordan, where there might be a little bit of respite and safety, or should I stay here or come back or whatever. So that was the plan. All right. Any comments or questions? Where that was the end of chapter 15. Any comments or questions? All right. Oh yeah, I had a really neat picture here of a city gates, and how these guys would sit there and stand outside the city gate. You see that over on the screen, and here's the rest of the plan that we just finished off with David leaving, and it was interesting to me that he left 10 women in charge. So, can you imagine? These must have been some spectacular women, because he's leaving everything out of there, and he's leaving them in charge of the castle, of the palace, to make sure that everything stayed okay. And so I don't know whether that was what he was thinking about that. Let's just say he did it. He left 10 of his wives there, concubines, wives, whatever, uh, to keep the fires burning. I guess he probably thought he would be back pretty soon. All right. I don't know if anybody else had a comment on that particular thing or not. What the, Well, okay. If you heard that, Pat said if she were Absalom, she would not trust those concubines, because they had been David's wives or concubines, and so he wouldn't trust them. Well, we're going to find out what he did with them in chapter 16. All right. So now, when David had passed a little beyond the summit, he'd already got up to Mount Olives and over the hill, as it were. Um, there was Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, to meet him with a pair of saddled donkeys, and on them 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 fig cakes, and a bottle of wine. So the king asked Ziba, "What are you doing with these?" Ziba said, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on. The figs and the bread and the figs are for the young men to eat, and the wine is for anyone who faints in the wilderness to drink." Then the king asked, "And where's your master's son?" His master being Saul, and he said, "Well, he's staying in Jerusalem." Uh, Ziba said to the king, uh, for he said, all right, here he is. He is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, "Today the house of Israel will restore to me the kingdom of my father." Then the king said to Ziba, "Behold, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours." And Ziba says, "I bow low. Let me find favor in your eyes, my lord the king." Okay. Ziba, just so you didn't figure that one out, is a jerk. He is dishonest. He is self-serving. He was self-serving when he was taking care of Saul's business after Saul was dead, and he was, then when David restored everything to Mephibosheth, then Ziba was no longer, a mighty bigwig there. Yeah, he was one of these guys. Again, he was back to being a servant for Mephibosheth. So here he is. He brings all this stuff to David, and says that, well, Mephibosheth, he's over there. He says that now that Absalom is coming back, that I know that they're going to restore to me, the things of the palace one, which is absolutely ridiculous. Because, and what was David thinking here? Because if Absalom, who would go against his own father to be the king, certainly not going to go and put one of Saul's sons back in a position of authority. So David didn't even, I mean, it just went again right over his head. You wonder, what was he thinking during these years? Um, because that doesn't make, it just doesn't make any sense at all. And so we find out who Ziba really was. He was a scoundrel. And so that's, David hastily had given, then says, well, anything that was Mephibosheth is yours. And now, because Mephibosheth has defected to Absalom, which he didn't really do, and they found out that later, but that's another story for another day. All right, verse 5. When the King David arrived at the Bahurim, behold, just coming out from there was a man of the house of the family of the house of Saul. His name was Shimei, son of Gera. As he came out, he kept on cursing and flinging stones at David uh, and all of King David's servants, while the people and all the mighty men were at his right hand and on his left. Thus Shimei said as he cursed, get out, the man of bloodshed, the good for nothing. Adonai has returned on you all the blood of Saul's house, in whose place you've reigned. Adonai has handed the kingdom over to your son Absalom. So see, your own evil has overtaken you, because you are a man of bloodshed. Okay, so this guy Shimei, he is the house of, from Saul. That means that he is a Benjamite. Okay, so even though David was able to unite the kingdom into one kingdom, the southern kingdom of Judah and Simeon at Hebron, and then all of the northern tribes, even though he was able to unite all of those, there were still very heavy tribal affiliations. All right. And so this guy said from the family of the house of Saul. So he was a relative of Saul. He was possibly was very angry because, he had lost stature. He had lost wealth. He had lost a lot of things due to Saul being killed. And so he blamed David for all of that. And he called him a man of bloodshed. Well, he's in good company there, because God had called David a man of bloodshed. I mean, that's a no-brainer. David was a warrior, and he had killed lots of people. And he also, to his discredit, he was a murderer. He'd killed the husband of Bathsheba. And so here we have David walking along, and this guy, and I would imagine he is far enough away that he could fling the rocks at David, but there's no way, no chance, no how that those rocks would hit David, because if they did, David's valiant men would have dispatched this fellow probably with extreme prejudice. All right. And so he was kind of out of the way, but still cursing and throwing those rocks. And that brings me to the next verses. And it says in verse 9, then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, now remember that is David's nephew, Why let this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over now and take off his head. But the king said, what have I to do with you, sons of Zeruiah? If he curses, it's because Adonai has said to him, curse David. So who would say, why did you do so? Then David said to Abishai and to all his officials, look, my son came from my own body, is seeking my life. How much more this Benjamite? Leave him alone. Let him curse, since Adonai has told him. And perhaps Adonai will look on my affliction and return good to me for his cursing this day. So David and his men continued on the way, while Shimei kept walking alongside the hill parallel with them and cursing as he walked, casting stones at him and throwing dirt. Finally, the king and all the people that were with him arrived wearily, so he refreshed himself there. They arrived there at the fords. All right, so this guy Abishai, who's his, like I said, it was his nephew, is basically his sister's son. And it's also, you remember that Joab was also the son, was his sister's son. And so he said, why, why do we have to put up with this? Let me go over there and I'll lop his head off. But that was his solution for every situation, though, was just to go and kill somebody. It's it was like the old gangsters. Do you want that we should make him swim with the fishes? That sort of thing. And um, so David said, look, you guys, all you can think about when something happens is, let's just go cut off their heads. And no, this is not it. If he's cursing me, he's basically, David is saying, I deserve it. I am a man of bloodshed. I have spilt innocent blood, and Adonai is telling him to do these kind of things. And so, just leave him alone. And if Adonai is with him, then we would be wrong to go against him. And if he wasn't with him, well, he's not really causing any harm other than hurting our feelings. So they just let it go, and David went on the way, and Shimei, he's still up there just chunking rocks and just cursing and being obnoxious. So in verse 15, meanwhile, Absalom and all the people of the men of Israel arrived in Jerusalem. Ahithophel was with them. Now, when David's friend Hushai, the Archite, came to Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom, long live the king, long live the king. But Absalom said to Hushai, is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend? No, said Hushai to Absalom, for the one whom Adonai has chosen, as well as these people, all the men of Israel, as I will be, with him I will stay. Beside, whom should I serve? Shouldn't I be in the presence of his son? As I have served in your father's presence, so I will be in your presence. Okay, this guy Hushai is a pretty slick guy. All right, he's there, and Absalom immediately says, hey, wait a minute. This is how you're going to treat, I know you are my dad's friend, and now you're just throwing him under the bus. And, Hushai said, no. He said, I want to serve the one who God has chosen. And looking at Absalom and making the inference that God has chosen, you, and at that point you cue the halo and the angelic voices and so forth, that sort of thing. And so it was very effective, because Absalom said, oh, okay. And so he, Hushai goes on and says, so should I be in the service of the chosen one, the son of the former king. I served him well, and I'll serve you well too. So Absalom was convinced, and Hushai was in. So going ahead then and finishing out our chapter here. Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give your counsel. What should we do?" So Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Go to your father's concubines, whom he has left to take care of his palace. Then all of Israel will hear that you have made yourself abhorrent to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will also be strengthened." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof. And Absalom went to his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now, in those days, the counsel that Ahithophel gave was like inquiring for the word of God. So was all of Ahithophel's counsel, both to David and with Absalom. All right, so this is kind of cloaked here with a lot of subtleties that you don't maybe pick up. Uh, Generally speaking, when a guy would come in and depose a king, then he would take over that king's harem. But you wouldn't really take it over. This is unprecedented here, that he would take over his father's concubines, his father's harem. And so basically what he did was he went up there and he ravaged all 10 of these women. And in the sight of Israel, because they were up on the roof of the palace, and the roof of the palace was could be seen from lots of different places. And so here he was up there uh, violating all of these women, and uh, and so, like I said, generally speaking, if that was a conquering king, people would have said, "Yeah, okay, ho hum, that's the way things are done." But this time, though, this is the wife of his father. So under Torah, that created an extremely dangerous situation. That meant that had them doing that, for Absalom to basically rape all of these 10 women, um, that he would be committing a sin against his father, and that was a death penalty actually. And so this advice that Ahithophel gave to Absalom was very, very ill-advised, as it were, because what this has done, it made the relationship between David and Absalom absolutely, positively, no way, Jose, could they ever reconcile. Because had he not done this, David might have been, forgiven Absalom if he was contrite. But when you go into the king's bedchamber and rape his wives, it would definitely have been incest, and it was prohibited in Torah, and the penalty for that was death. And so he was doing his own death penalty there. But what he was saying is, what you're doing is we're burning the bridges. We're going against David, the king, the former king, and then all of your people will say, yes, okay, you'll be strengthened, because now they know that there can only be one way. We're going to go, with David, or with Absalom against David. And so then they said they pitched a tent up on the roof. And I was reading one guide, and they said, well, the tent that they would have done would have been a chuppah, which is the wedding tent thing like that. I don't know. I think that is just speculation on this guy's part, and personally, I don't buy it. That they would have done something like that. They just said a tent, something to cover them up from the hot sun. But it did say something in verse 23 that's interesting. It says, now in those days the counsel that Ahithophel gave was like inquiring for the word of God. In other words, up until this time, the counsel and the word that came to David from Ahithophel was good, it was righteous, it was just, and that they took it as being the word of God. And so that's how David considered it. And now Absalom thinks the same thing. But how can it be the word of God if Ahithophel is telling them to do something that is in direct violation of Torah? It's just not right, and it just couldn't be that way. And so that's what that ends our chapter here tonight. That ends our study for tonight. Are there any comments or questions regarding this? Anything at all?
To say. I have something to say.
Well, Pat says she thinks that if he left his wives, that he would think that the people would, accept him back and so forth, that he wasn't really going to be running away and abandoning them, that he was just basically the people that left with him, they didn't ask any questions. They knew that he was a brilliant tactician. And so if he said, run, we'll fight another day, then that meant, okay, yeah, we're not giving up. We're just going to fight, go around and do something to our advantage. So they went right with him. And but he left his wives there, probably thinking, I'm going to be back pretty soon. And then